Well, hello, I want to welcome you to our third ever What Does God Say About podcast. And we are talking about a topic that is amazingly important right now, that has to be talked about in the church, and that I feel like God has some special things He wants to share and give to you through our guest speakers. We're talking about marriage and family, and we have here with us Eric, who's our worship pastor, and then Sarah, our marriage and family pastor. And I thought it would be good to bring someone else in here. I've been married for 30 years now, and so things have changed a little bit in the world since then. You've been married for how many years, Sarah?
14.
14 and
11.
11. Okay, so I'm a couple decades beyond there, but all three of us, even though I'm from a different generation than you two, you're both millennials and I'm a Gen Xer, but we all have this burden for marriage and burden for family and parenting, and maybe a little different angle, a different perspective, and I thought it'd be good for all of us to come and share a little bit about that. Yep. So, Sarah, why don't we just have you start a little bit about, tell us your burden, your passion, your hope, maybe why you're sitting here at this table right now to talk about marriage and parenting.
Yeah, so I come from a broken family, and so does my husband. So both of us have seen the effects of that and just kind of the detrimental burden of coming from a broken family. And we've always wanted something different for our family. But lately, God's been really stirring my heart, not just for our family personally, but for other families as well, as we've watched friends walk through divorce and just watched, again, those same detrimental effects, happen to them and their kids. And so my burden and my hope is that we can create this idea of like whole, healthy, and connected families. And I think that as social media and even media, like if I think back to TV shows like Leave It to Beaver or whatever, like there's this outward facing perfection of what families are supposed to be. But if you look at the Bible, God uses broken families. I mean, Adam and Eve raised the first murderer.
Right.
And Mary and Joseph were pretty great, but they left their kid alone somewhere else for 3 days before they even figured it out. So I just think that God uses dysfunctional families to write His story. And so when we get it right, we get to show His love and His hope and His intimacy with us. And when we get it wrong, He uses it to show His story of redemption. So.
Oh, that's so good. One of the things that I want to be really clear here is that we all come from broken families, but there's no shame there. And we've got a burden for families to be healthy. And I was just reading this morning in my devotions about Abraham, where 2 times he says, hey, I'm just going to tell everybody that even though you're my wife, I'm going to tell them you're my sister. I'm like, that's not good family advice. That doesn't work well. And so, but still God is faithful in the covenant. Abraham almost threw the covenant away and just said, yeah, just take my wife, but God is still faithful. And He still brings life and healing. So thanks for saying that. And that's one of the things that I want to be clear through this whole time, that no matter what family you come through or from or that you've created, there is hope and there's life. So how about you, Eric? Tell us a little bit about your burden and about why you're sitting here at this table.
Yeah. Sarah said it perfectly, and it's a lot of kind of how I feel just coming from a broken family. It was this burning desire to have a different trajectory for my family line, and say, you know what, we're not going to do that this way anymore. And I always just thank Jesus for this, because He's really, really shown me how to do this. Even when I mess up, He's so kind about it, and He's so like, all right, you messed up, but let's figure that out together and let's work through this. And so, my desire for families right now is, because of Jesus having I've had to heavily rely on His guidance for this, is to see more families deeply Christ-centered. And I think everything just flows out of our relationship with Christ, right? And so he did such a good job modeling what it means to love other people and to value them and to have just absolute unfailing love for people, you know, and we're going to fail, right? That's just, I've done it so many times, you know, I've done it in the last couple of days, have failed to love my wife well and to love my kids well. But again, it's that desire to say, okay, I know I messed up, but I got to lean on Christ for this because he's going to help me bring me back to kind of the line, you know? So it's just my desire to see that. And I think right now it just feels to me like there's a lack of that deep connection with Jesus, which then flows into our marriages and our kids. And we have to find a way to get back to that right now. Because I've just seen so many of my friends just struggle. And like you said, too, it's just so many of our friends getting divorced. And I'm like, what is going on? So, yeah.
Well, I think one of the things with that, right now there are so many families that are broken, like all of ours were. Yeah. And so it's easy to just kind of say, yeah, well, so what? You know, your parents were divorced, everybody's parents were divorced. I mean, and certainly that's not the case, but it feels like that. And but you know, the truth is the impact of that is still profound for every single one of those kids who are under it. And when I talk about the burden that I have here, I think I see it certainly from the marital perspective, but I also see it from the kids' perspective where, you know, I watched my family and their marriage and, you know, dissolve, and then, you know, my dad leave and just mom trying to raise us. And I have this burden that profoundly impacts kids, whether we want it to or not.
Absolutely.
And not to put guilt on anyone, because God redeems, and if we're going to invite Jesus back into any situation, any family situation, if we invite Jesus back into it, he'll bring something beautiful out of it. Yeah. He does it again and again. But if you don't bring Jesus into it, and if you don't invite redemption into it, the fallout. And, you know, I think it's Matthew 24:12 says that the love of most will grow cold in these end days. And I have always thought, even before we got through these crazy times that we're in right now, that passage has to be talking about the breakdown of family. Because, you know, when you see people who are rejected, who feel invisible, who don't feel loved, they don't know where they're at, that they were supposed to get in their family, that's when their love grows cold. And we're seeing, I think, a lot of the pain that we have right now in our nation is because families are broken and there is no redemption. There's no turning to Christ to come back to between that. And it's not hard to see this correlation between broken families and a broken world and a loveless world. And that's just not God's heart. And that's why I wanted to talk about this, because God's heart is for us to thrive. And marriage is a good thing. Proverbs tells us that he who finds a wife finds a good thing. And family it's not perfect, and sure, it's hard, but boy, it's such a powerful force and a beautiful thing when we invite Christ in the middle of it.
Absolutely.
So, Eric, maybe you can talk a little bit more. You shared that you know, you have a broken family, but you have a new legacy.
Sure.
Or you had a broken family, so your family's not broken now.
No, that's good.
But you're developing a new legacy. So, tell us a little bit, like, well, you know, I know that both you and I have talked about this before, how we kind of felt like we were making it up. Like, well, we know we're not going to do that, so what do we do? And so what have you learned for, like, just key strategies?
Sure.
You know, your keys for a new legacy to have a thriving family and marriage?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and so much of my childhood was, you know, based on selfishness, you know, and my wants and desires, and, you know, and seeing others around me. But, like, I think when we kind of flip that on its head and say, you know what, I'm going to honor my family, I'm going to honor my kids and my wife, I'm going to value them, and I want to have the eyes of Jesus for my wife, and the eyes of Jesus for how does he see them, you know? And I want to see them like that. You know, I just think about, like, even when I'm frustrated and I'm angry, like, I still want to see them like he does, you know? And I've had to really learn how to not react to things and just take a deep breath and say, okay, God, like, how do you see them? Because I'm struggling right now, you know? And that's okay. And in that moment, Jesus will meet you, you know? And if you ask that prayer, I mean, this is how much I think he loves marriage and he loves family is because it's almost immediately when I ask that question, he gives me those eyes to see it. It's not like one of those things like, okay, well, you pray and then, a week later you're going to finally get the revelation from God of like how he sees. No, it's like immediate for me, and I think he wants like right now, let's fix this now. Yeah. And so it's just, that new legacy. And I want that to pour over to my kids too. As they grow up, I want to see them seeing others as he does. Yeah. Because without that, we're gonna have a bad taste in our mouth with people. We're gonna become cynical. And I do not want that. And for my family, that's a new legacy.
One of the things that when I've been officiating weddings, you talk about the happiness and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I've been telling couples. It doesn't matter because they're not listening to me anyway. They're just wondering, like, when do we get to the reception? But I tell them where we're sitting there, I'll tell them, God didn't bring you together for your happiness. Mm-hmm. He actually brought you together for your growth. Yeah. And so when you talk about that, like seeing people like Jesus sees them, to understand that this unit that God brings together is actually so my kids can see what God the Father is like by the way that you act. And so my wife can be encouraged and you could bring out the best in her. And so my husband could be challenged and supported to become who he's meant to be in Christ. And I think if we would just kind of understand, like, yeah, there's happiness and there's dissatisfaction as well. But it's really the purpose is your growth. And what Jesus wants to do in my kids, I love that. Yeah. And what Jesus wants to do in my wife or my husband, it changes the whole way you go through the whole thing. So I kind of cut you off. Did you have anything else?
That's basically it. That's the new legacy I want to set. So.
Okay. And now you talked both about seeing kind of the pain that's out there right now. So, a lot of us have seen a lot of divorce around us and our friends and people walking with Jesus and not walking with Jesus. And it just, it's a difficult time, I think, to be married and to stay married. And so maybe from your perspective, like what do you think is causing the struggle right now and the difficulty and the disillusion of marriage around us right now?
Yeah, and just the things that I've seen, is this selfishness, how we want things our way, and we don't necessarily want to bring our spouse in along with us, or want to bring our kids along with us, and not even bring them along with us, but like, hey, what are your desires? What do you want? And to be able to like work together in that. And there's a very split in families of this selfish desire that we all have. Sure. We really do, but the lack of humility is a big thing that I'm seeing right now, is like to admit when you're wrong about something. And that's hard for even me, it's hard for my wife too, is like, when you're in the moment, you're heated about something, or you the last thing you want to do is go, well, babe, I'm really sorry. Sure. I messed up, and it may take me a minute, but I get there, I get there pretty quick usually, because I'm a people pleaser at heart, I think. And so I just kind of want things to end, but I have to not have that in mind. I have to like be genuine about it and say, okay, God, show me what I did wrong here. Cause this ain't right. Even if I think I'm 100% right, there's still something I did wrong, And so just the lack of humility I'm really seeing right now, and just selfish desires. Yeah.
So we're going to shift a little bit to parenting, but before we do you have any other thoughts on what's going on with the families that you see and the marriages?
Yeah, so I have just kind of noticed that in the families and stuff that I've talked to, that people are afraid to talk about the messy stuff in marriage. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people, even with each other in a marriage, they don't want to talk about the hard stuff. And so they just figure out, well, if I step away just a little bit, this won't feel so hard. And they just keep taking little steps away from each other over and over and over again until it's 20 years later. And they're like, well, we just grew apart. Well, you took lots of little steps along the way when you could have, moved toward connection. Wow. So, and like you said, there's not guilt in that. I think that it's just this undercurrent thing of I don't want to be uncomfortable, so I'm going to just move away a little bit so that things feel less tense.
Yeah.
It gets so complicated, and I've had so many people in my office. You guys have had people in your offices where like all the issues and like, well, I'm trying, but they're not, and it's just like so complicated. But the solution that you're offering there is pretty simple, and I think it really is. And it is to just continue to decide and to press in towards your spouse in the little ways, with these difficult things, with the fun things, but just to continually choose over and over and over to close that distance. But it's so easy to not. And once you stop, it's so easy to continue to not. And then it becomes really, really complicated and really difficult to close those chasms once they've opened up. And painful and hard. And boy, I have so much compassion for those who go through that because I've watched it. My family did that, and I see many of my friends do that. But it is a simple thing that's so difficult and so easy to forget as you go along.
And I read recently that the average couple waits like 7 years to get help after something happens. And at that point in time, you're already like worlds apart. So, I would just say like, get help early. Don't be afraid to talk about it with each other or with your small group or with your community, and take those steps.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please
It's
do.
really good. And I'll be, the guinea pig here. My wife and I we waited a long time to actually go through intensive counseling, and thankfully God kind of helped reveal a lot of things to me. But I'm like, why didn't we do this sooner? Like, and I think there's such a stigma with counseling right now. It's like, well, I don't want to share my problems. No, I don't want to share. Well, if you don't talk about them, you don't get in the messy stuff like you were talking about. I mean, it's just going to be swept under the rug. We're not going to deal with it. They're going to surface later in a real ugly way, and we have to deal with our issues, and we have to deal with them quickly, and it's just that's going back to that burden thing. I'm like, well, get some help, get some help now before it's too late. So.
Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to actually kind of skip ahead, and I want from where we plan on going, and I want to talk about. It's kind of a big idea. We always want to say, well, what does God say? What does the Bible say about marriage? And I'm going to, speaking of the weddings that you do, you always go to 1 Corinthians 13, and that's the big love chapter here. And I've preached this at a number of weddings. I don't use it so much anymore, but I just want to bring up one of the things that the Bible says. And in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1, it says, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge." There we go. "And if I have faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing." Now here's the part I want you to catch. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It's not proud. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth, always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. One of the things that Gene and I, when we're talking with couples in premarital, one of the first things that I want them to get is marriage is not 50-50. And if you think it is, you think about it. If it's 50-50, then you both have to be going 100%. You got to do your total 50. They got to do their total 50, and then you'll meet one another. And that seldom happens. And so if you're thinking, well, when they do this, then I will, or once they do this, then I'll respond, you've already lost the battle. And you have to understand that marriage is 100-100. And so the beautiful thing about that is if I'm going to just always love, then when my spouse fails, we're covered.
Yeah.
If they're only given 2%, but I'm given 100, we still meet each other.
Yeah.
If they're given 15% and I'm still given 100, we meet each other. And so this passage is so important for marriage because love is a choice. And one of the things that makes me so frustrated is when, well, I just don't feel in love with you anymore. And I'm like, well, did you ever feel in love? I guess you felt all sorts of romantic feelings, but love is a decision. I don't think when Jesus was up on the cross, he was saying, man, I just feel so warm about all these people and their sin right now. It was, no, I'm choosing to love them despite their ugliness. And that's what our love is. And so love is patient there. That means that I'm going to choose to be patient. Love is kind. I'm going to choose to be kind. I'm not going to feel patient with them. I'm not going to feel kind towards them. I'm going to be that towards them. And so this 100-100 is, if you're not sure how to take a step towards your spouse, go to 1 Corinthians 13:4, and you got a little game plan there. Choose to be patient. Choose to be kind. Choose not to envy. Choose not to boast. Choose not to be proud. Don't be rude. Keep no record of wrong. Choose to protect. To choose to persevere. And you do all these choices and these little 100-100 coverings take your marriage to a place where you have life and you can meet one another.
Sure.
Any thoughts on that or other secrets for marriage? And I'm actually noticed I'm probably going to shift out of parenting because I think that's our next podcast.
Yeah.
So I think this marriage topic is just too big. So we're going to come back to
if I can say one thing on that, it's that, you were talking about how important Jesus is to this, that I think it's easy to separate, like, this is my relationship with God, this is my relationship with my husband, and this is my relationship with my kids. But the truth is that I love my husband out of the overflow of my relationship with Jesus. Yep. And I love my kids out of the overflow of my relationship with my husband. So they're all separate and there's different tools, for each one. But, if this one's not right, if that relationship with Jesus isn't starting everything, or if something in your marriage is wrong, that trickles down to your parenting too. So,
Yeah, I love that. And I think this idea of saying, okay, I'll just continue to choose out of the overflow of my heart. And, I really want to encourage you to bring Jesus into your relationship. And if you haven't, and if you're struggling, the very first thing is, okay, Jesus, how do I love her? Jesus, how do I love him? And I think that we just kind of forget that sometimes. It's like he is for your family. And you can sit down and what he's given you, seek him. Okay, now show me, Lord. And that'll pour out. And he'll give you divine strategies to close the distance. And I've seen that time and time again where it's just like, I'm so frustrated with her. I don't know what to do right now. But if I'll humble myself, which you talked about, go to Jesus, the source of all that I have. Okay, Lord, you love her. You love this marriage. Now give me the strategy. And these strategies will come from heaven, that God will give us to close the distance. So,
absolutely.
So, I want to talk just a little bit, since I'm older and you're younger. I'm not going to say I'm old. I'm just older. But, I know that families have changed a little bit. And, for my generation, a big issue in marriage was roles. And I think it's because a lot of us saw dads who were just like, it's my way and, give me my slippers and all that kind of stuff. So we're like, we reacted to that. And so a lot of men in my generation kind of said, well, they just kind of backed off from leadership and engaging in a role. And, they didn't want to step up because they didn't want to step on. And I understand that, but I think we lost something good as we were correcting the bad in the middle of that. And then when guys my age would try to step up, we'd like, okay, go be the leader. Well, they would make a move and the wife would be like, what are you doing? And then kind of slap them down, and it was just this cycle. And the wife would be frustrated. Well, my husband's not a leader, and because he was afraid to lead and she didn't want him to lead. And it was just this mess. And so that was one of the big things we always had to work on. But now in your generation, I'm imagining maybe there's different problems or you see different issues. And I'd like to hear from you how family issues have changed and really what do you see as the Gen Z or the millennial issue in families that occurs again and again.
Got some?
So I think that off the top of my head, technology is the first thing that comes to mind. It's at our fingertips all the time, and even when I was a kid, you couldn't binge watch anything. Like you couldn't numb yourself with technology the way that you can. And like I was saying earlier, I think so many people they don't want to talk about the hard stuff, so they numb themselves out with social media or Netflix or, alcohol or whatever it is. And it helps them not have to talk about it. So I think that not talking about it is the root of it.
Yeah.
But I think that that technology has just made it really, really easy to numb out and not choose connection.
That's interesting because I've had a number of couples, a handful that video games is the problem, or at least one of the big problems, and it's actually the symptom. The problem is what you're talking about. It's numbing yourself. It's connection. But that wasn't 15 years ago, that wasn't something that I was talking about with couples of like, hey, you can't play 8 hours of video games every day. But there are husbands that are doing that right now. Mostly husbands. I imagine wives that do that as well. And that whole idea of, wow, this is a new world where that thing that seems like, well, it's just my relaxing, it's just my fun, is actually driving a wedge in between marriages. Yeah.
I think, especially out of technology, there comes a whole nother world of issues that come out of that. You're talking about, like you said, numbing yourself, separation. You think about like the access to pornography, all this other stuff. It is wild that, and I think about I've talked to several people, our age or, who have kids my age, I'm like, I can't believe this world they have to grow up in. Like, it's going to be so much even different for them than it was for us. And so I don't see like a whole lot of, God is obviously using amazing things that we see that are like, oh, those are terrible things, but God uses them all to like, for his glory and to kind of redeem things and redeem marriages and stuff. But it's not getting easier, I don't think, especially for us, especially for our kids. It's not, these issues are just completely different than, say, your generation, and it's just not getting easier. I think there's a lot of problems that we're just not willing to talk about, and I don't think we've been willing to talk about for a long time. That's why I'm so grateful that we have you who are willing to talk about these kind of things, as our senior pastor, as our leader here, not only here but even on a weekend. Like, hey, we need to talk about this. This is a problem, And so if a Christian man or a Christian woman or a pastor, a church is not willing to talk about these things, who's going to? So, and they're gonna find fulfillment in whatever else. True. So, and it goes back to just having, as these problems surface and as these issues become more and more prevalent in our age and our time, our connection with Jesus is even more and more and more important. We have to stay connected with him because we don't have a fighting chance otherwise.
Yeah. So what I'd like you both to help us wrap up with is just some strategies and let's end this with hope and how we can go forward and give us maybe a few handles so we can see life come into our marriages wherever we are. But one thing, it's just such an obvious, it's almost cliche, but I don't want anyone to forget the power of prayer in our marriage, in our family, in our parenting. When you just ask God to come in and intervene and to change a person's heart, to set up circumstances. I can't say how many times where Gina's prayed for me, like, God, you've got to change that guy. And then it takes months, sometimes even years, and then all of a sudden I'll say, I think I've changed on that thing, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
And Gina just is kind of smiling because she's like, because my prayers are powerful. So, don't ever forget how important that is to cry out on behalf of your spouse and on your marriage. So that's just one simple strategy. But give us some hope. We'll start with you, Sarah.
Okay.
All right.
So I would say that when you're in like an area of conflict with your spouse, that changing the goal of the conflict from being agreement to being understanding. So there are some things that my husband and I probably will never agree on. Yeah. But when we come to each other and the goal of the conversation is to understand each other instead of being in agreement, it makes a big difference.
Oh, that's gold.
Yeah.
Yeah. Communication is hearing and being heard. Yeah. It's not getting your way.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's a number of things that Gina and I, nutrition, we will never agree on nutrition. And I will always want chips and nachos, and she will always want good for you stuff. And that's just how it's going to be.
That's so
And
familiar.
it's caused real fights.
Yeah.
But I understand her. She understands me.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Well, mine's kind of actually on the same line, and and just being super intentional about your communication. And one of the things I learned, and I talked about too, is just in our intensive marriage retreat that we did. The big thing that was, it just will never leave me again, ever again, is validating my wife, and her validating me
good.
is like, again, we may not disagree, we may not agree on it, but I hear you. I look at her in the eyes and say, I hear you. And I understand where you're coming from. And just there's a process of how to have effective communication, and to be able to learn how to do that and do it well, I think it's going to cause, it's just going to, be able to reflect so many issues in your marriage. And so just the communication thing's huge.
That brings me back to that idea of love, and love and respect are such an important part of marriage. And both of those things are choice, and so it's to not tear down your wife around others, and to not tear down your husband. And when they're all together,
Yes.
and I have to I'm so thankful for Gina that she protects me when she's with other people, and she's got plenty of content. I've given her more than enough to work with,
Yeah.
and but she doesn't
Same
use
here.
it against me. She doesn't. She protects me, and she honors me in front of other people.
Yes.
And I mean, you may have noticed on the pulpit, like, the stories, like the guy messing up there, it's not Gina, and she does mess up sometimes, but I'm not going to tear her down, or I'm going to look in everything that I do to choose to like honor her, to cherish her, and then she chooses to respect me in all that she does.
Yeah.
So, good. All right. Any other?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've got millions. No, I'm just kidding.
How long do we really have?
Yeah. No, I think along with that, Justin and I kind of have a competition whenever we're in a disagreement of who can say, like, what do you need first? And like and get to that place of like, what I want doesn't matter, but what do you need? Or how can I serve you? Or what do you need to feel right now? And that typically just kind of dissipates the argument because you feel heard.
Yeah.
You feel seen. So
Yep.
that's a big deal. And we really just focus on making sure that we tell each other about ourselves. So I don't come to him and say, well, you're a jerk and you this and you that. But to say, like, I feel sad when this
Yes.
happens.
Yes.
And so rather than coming at it like attacking, just trying to communicate my heart and what I feel and what I need. And then he's a super powerful, awesome person and can make a good choice
Yeah.
at that point. So
Well, there's a real power too, where being honest with who you are there, and to say, I think it's a good thing to say, I need, I wish, I hope, I desire. I think that sometimes we're afraid to do that in our relationships.
Yes.
And then to also understand who can actually fulfill what need. And so the whole, another Hollywood line, you complete me, it's the stupidest thing that anyone's ever said. So listen, if you're not married, get complete first in Jesus,
Yes,
then
there
go
you
get
go.
married, okay? Because if
Preach.
you're looking for the other person to complete you, you're
Yeah.
going to be sorely disappointed. And so some of the things that I look to Gina for, actually, it's not fair. She doesn't have the capability to answer some of these needs. It's things that only Jesus really can do in my
Yes.
heart.
Yes.
But those are real needs. And so it's like, okay, do I bring that to Gina, or do I bring that to Jesus, or do I bring that to Eric? And
Yeah.
I need to go fishing or something
Yeah.
like that. And to not put these expectations on one another that they can't fulfill.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think another thing that goes along that lines is that, like, to get a whole healthy family, you need whole healthy people.
Right.
And so I think that it's really easy in marriage. We come in broken and with baggage, and if we don't deal with that personally, and my own heart splinters and my own stuff, like, it just festers
Yeah.
up and comes out. So definitely, like, if you're not married, work through your stuff beforehand as much as you can, or be willing to know that, like, you and your husband are going to have to work through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, another great question is, whose issue is this? And I'm all mad at Gina, but it's my stuff.
Yeah.
It's my hurt from my childhood. And to get a hold of that. And I've been through counseling a few times now, and I'd suggest it. If you came through a broken family, listen, talk to your pastors or talk to Calvin or a counselor or, go through a prayer appointment here, but work through those things so that you're not expecting really putting your baggage on to your spouse. And so many of the things that Gina does wrong are actually me. And I have this lens of my own stuff that colors what she does. And as long as you've got that on, it's going to be really hard to see her, just like you started us off as Jesus sees her or him. So, yeah. All right. We've got so much more we can talk about. I'm glad we didn't cover parenting. So this is our third ever podcast, and I'm making it our first ever two-part podcast.
There we go.
So we're gonna need to come back, I'm sure.
Good.
And I want to talk about parenting next time. And I think you guys are right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
My kids are mostly gone. I got one more in the house, so I'm at a little different stage. So we'll come back, I think, next time and talk about parenting. But thank you so much for what you had to offer.
Yeah.
And we love you guys. Just keep following what Jesus has to say. Go to the Word, Corinthians 13, and choose to love. Love you guys. See you soon.